The participants of this group keep one certain animal on the run. 150 Years of History looks at how members of a certain club have kept up the chase throughout the decades. Richard Holmes narrates.
Fox hunting in what is now Howard County has a 200-year-old tradition. Today, the sport is referred to in the more politically correct term as fox chasing because rarely is a fox caught or injured during a chase. There have been a number of fox hunting clubs in Howard County down through the years. The Patapsco hunt organized here in 1898 and continued until it disbanded in 1910. The Howard County Hunt Club was organized in 1930 at Burley Manor. In 1932, it was moved to a farm in Glenelg. In 1985, the club merged with the Iron Bridge Hounds Club of Laurel to form the Howard County Iron Bridge Hounds. The merged clubs moved in May 1997 to a new location on Windsor Forest Road in the western end of the county. One of the biggest hunts of the year took place at Doregan Manor each Thanksgiving. Traditionally preceding the hunt, the hounds, horses, and riders were blessed by a priest. The fox were also blessed. Howard County's fox chasing tradition, part of Howard County's 150 years of history.
Now, some Howard Countyans could offer tips when it comes to one four-footed creature. 150 Years of History looks at what the county has offered the horse racing industry through the years. Richard Holmes narrates.
Howard County is home to a variety of people who are important to one of Maryland's largest industries, thoroughbred racing. From the breeders to the owners, the trainers, and the jockeys, all of those devoted to the equine industry add to the diversity of Howard County lifestyle. Just over the line in Anne Arundel County, Laurel Park Racetrack opened October 2nd, 1911, under the direction of the Laurel Four-County Fair. 3 years later, it was purchased by James Butler, a Florida racetrack operator. People came to the races in buggies, special trains from Baltimore and Washington, and in automobiles. Some even came on horseback. Horse racing originally shared the bill with automobile racing, but thoroughbred horses quickly prevailed. Today, Laurel Park is a high-tech operation in every sense of the word, beautiful to behold and providing the racing fan every modern convenience. Thoroughbred racing in Howard County, part of Howard County's 150 years of history.
Well, horses again take center stage in this edition of 150 Years of History. We learn where these four-footed animals were the center of attention in years past in Howard County. Richard Holmes narrates and fills us in on the details.
Doregan Manor was for many years host to the annual Doregan Manor Horse Show. Held each May, it was for the benefit of the Howard County Health Association and always drew throngs of people, as seen here in this 1934 photo. Billy Barton, a famous thoroughbred, is shown jumping at Doregan Manor in October 1932. A life-size statue of him stands in front of the entrance to the grandstand at the Laurel Park Racetrack. Here is young Donald Warfield on his favorite pony at the Doregan Manor Horse Show about 1930. 15 classes for competition were offered, and 2 pony races closed the day's events. The Howard County Landowners and Farmers Horse Show was held around the 1st of September every year at the Howard County Hunt Kennels. At that event, this serious young lady was putting her pony through its paces. And here the judges gave a close once-over to the pony class. That day, little Helen Carroll was following in the best Howard County tradition by sitting on a pony at the earliest possible age. These 3 kids were all dressed up for the Gay 90s class in 1937. Howard County Horse Shows, a part of Howard County's 150 years of history.
Just outside Howard County is the town of Sykesville, which sits over the Patapsco River in Carroll County. But Sykesville's roots actually began in Howard County. We take a look back at our 150 years of history with Richard Holmes.
Before the Great Flood of 1868, most of the town of Sykesville was located on the southern, flatland side of the Patapsco River in Howard County. The land on the northern or Carroll County side had steep hills and too many springs for most of Sykesville's earliest settlers to build on. James Sykes, considered the town's founding father, came to the area in the late 1820s. In 1831, he rebuilt an old decaying grist mill on the Howard County side of the river. By 1845, the grist mill had become the Howard County Cotton Factory, employing about 200 workers. Nearby on the Carroll County side, he built a 4-story stone hotel and tavern between the railroad tracks and the river as a rest stop for railroad travelers. The flood of 1868 wiped out the town on the flat Howard County land south of the river. Bridges, buildings, and acres of corn and oat crops were washed away, and the Howard County Cotton Factory was destroyed. The stone hotel on the north side of the river was also destroyed, along with the railroad tracks. After the flood, Sykesville rebuilt on the safe, higher northern side of the Patapsco River. When Sykesville was in Howard County, part of our 150 years of history.
It may be a very small and quiet place now, but Ilchester in the 1800s was a thriving town. 150 years of history offers more details on this historic area. Richard Holmes narrates.
In the mid-1800s, Ilchester Mills in eastern Howard County, between Elkridge and Ellicott City, was a bustling community. This photo shows Ilchester in the early 1900s. The stone house in the center was built by George Elllicott Jr. after the railroad came into the valley. Ellicott's try at running an inn close to the railroad never prospered, and he sold his property to the Redemptionist Order of the Roman Catholic Church. By 1868, a large 3-story brick building was ready for the students and the 3 fathers who formed the entire faculty. Later, a 4th and 5th floor were added. Originally known as Mount St. Clemens, it later became known as St. Mary's College. Eventually, it burned down completely. This illustration shows the Patapsco River at Ilchester in 1874, with the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad crossing the bridge where the Patterson Viaduct once stood. None of this remains since the railroad line was relocated. Now closed, the Ilchester Post Office was one of the smallest in Maryland and also one of the earliest in the county. This power plant at Ilchester was purchased by the Baltimore Gas and Electric Company in 1913 from the Patapsco Electric and Manufacturing Company. Ilchester, part of Howard County's 150 years of history.
Ellicott City was the home of the earliest fire department in Howard County. Pages from the Past offers an inside look at this fire station. Richard Holmes narrates.
The first firehouse of the Ellicott City Volunteer Fire Company was built in 1888 at the corner of Church Avenue and Main Street. A hand-drawn ladder wagon, later outfitted to be pulled by horses, was the first piece of equipment owned by the fire company. In 1892, a side-stroke, hand-operated, horse-drawn piston pumper was purchased, along with a 2-wheel hose reel, which today has been fully restored. In 1910, a Type Road, horse-drawn, gasoline motor-driven triplex piston pumper was purchased to provide additional protection to the town, and it remained in service until 1923. The department kept up with the modernization of fire equipment and in 1924 purchased its first motorized fire truck. For 36 years, the company protected the citizens of the town against fire and other emergencies from its original location. The department moved into a larger building on Main Street in 1924 to house the new motorized fire truck. In 1925, a chemical fire truck was added and shown off proudly here, along with their first fire truck and the assembled firemen. Ellicott City's early fire department, a step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
One local town pledges its allegiance to 2 counties. Our 150 Years of History segment highlights some of the history of this area that's shared by Howard and a neighboring jurisdiction. Richard Holmes narrates.
Located in both Howard and Baltimore counties, Woodstock is one of the few Patapsco Valley towns that did not have its beginning as a mill town. It became known for its beautiful granite, used in many famous buildings, and also for its limestone quarries. Woodstock developed after the trains came through the valley in the 1830s, enabling the shipment of granite and limestone and to bring in summer tourists. Woodstock College, operated by the Jesuits, opened in 1867 on the Baltimore side. The college lasted until 1970. The Jesuits were very active in the community and most helpful to the farmers. Woodstock was the home of the Brown family that traces itself back to Thomas Brown, the first Patuxent Ranger in the 1600s. The Woodstock Swells, seen here in 1913, was a minstrel troupe performing music and drama. This old house, shown here in 1911, still stands today east of Woodstock Road, though now considerably changed in appearance. And this former store has served the Woodstock community for many years as a snowball stand. Woodstock in both Baltimore and Howard counties, part of Howard County's 150 years of history.
Today's village of Oakland Mills in Columbia is the namesake of yet another village reflecting another time, yet pretty much the same place. 150 years of history goes back a few centuries when early settlers made this location their home. Richard Holmes narrates this story.
This old blacksmith shop at Oakland Mills in Columbia is one of only 4 surviving buildings from the tiny village of Oakland Mills from the 1800s. A grist mill was part of this village. It was 5 stories high, built along the banks of the Little Patuxent River in the late 1700s. This was the cooper's store and dwelling for the Oakland flour mill. Other mills were added at a later date: a sawmill, a plaster mill, and a merchant's mill. Here we see the restored cooper's store and dwelling. This original Oakland miller's house was first used as a shop and dwelling. Later it was restored as a home, complete with an addition. Early settlers named their homes, and this one still standing in Oakland Mills has always been known as Felicity. In the vicinity was the stately home called Oakland Manor, which gave the town its name. Oakland Manor, now called just Oakland, was constructed in 1820. This impressive rear porch was removed prior to 1940. Today it may be the most impressive historic site in the new town of Columbia. Here is the cooper's house today. The surviving original buildings from the old village of Oakland Mills sit just off northbound Route 29, a little south of the intersection with Route 175. They are on a parallel side road on the right called Old Columbia Road. The old Oakland Mills Village, part of Howard County's 150 years of history.
Today on 150 Years of History, we're going to take you through a video photo album of life in western Howard County. See what memories they'll call up for you. Richard Holmes narrates.
Today we are looking at snapshots that illustrate rural life in western Howard County. Here we see a typical team of farm horses named Jack and Doc, owned by Bernard Warfield. These gentlemen seem to be admiring this litter of pigs near Woodbine around 1920. Typical of early Howard County is this 1953 recreation of a hogshead being rolled to a river. Here we see pitching hay onto a wagon on a farm near West Friendship around 1935. Mrs. Marvin Day's father and her cousin Flossie are seen here storing ice for the summer after cutting it from a pond on their farm in Glenelg. Raccoon hunting was a favorite pastime. Here are Roy Figge, Fred Schatz Jr., Carol O'Donnell, and Thomas P. O'Donnell with their catches and their dogs. Farmers lined up with their trucks fully loaded at the cannery in Woodbine. Butchering was an annual fall necessity for farm families. 3 Duval brothers and Bernard Warfield stopped to pose for this picture while clearing brush to enlarge a field. Remembrances of early rural life in the western part of Howard County, part of Howard County's 150 years of history.
You can find bits of Howard County history off the main roads and highways. Today's 150 Years of History shows what you might find off the main thoroughfares. Richard Holmes narrates.
Today we are taking a look at old Howard County communities that were off the beaten track. Just 2 miles southeast of Savage is a small town called Annapolis Junction. Got its name because it was located where the Annapolis and Elkridge Railroad split and either headed to Annapolis or picked up the B&O Railroad and headed to Washington or Baltimore. The town of Simpsonville is nestled near the Middle Patuxent River, surrounded by hills on all sides. It stands at the intersection of Old Clarksville Pike, now Route 32, and Cedar Lane. Simpsonville was the site of one of the earliest grist mills in the county. It became a flourishing 19th century village. The only remains of the town today are the stabilized walls of the old Simpsonville mill and remnants of 10 structures. Fulton, once known as Waters, sits just west of Route 29 on Route 216. It was a very small community surrounded by farms. It was also the site of Montpelier, seen here. Buried under 50 feet of water in the Triadelphia Reservoir stands the remains of the town of Triadelphia. These buildings were part of the village that once stood in Montgomery County but shared a Howard County post office. The town was founded by 3 Quaker brothers who married 3 sisters. One of them invented the icebox. Howard County communities off the beaten track. Part of Howard County's 150 years of history.
Flowers will be on your mind when you visit or think of this community in the western part of Howard County. 150 years of history takes us to a town that one Maryland governor called home.
Howard County's small community of Daisy was not on any main road and was situated a little south of Lisbon. This store at Daisy was the center of all activity in the town. The second floor was the community center where parties and square dancing were held. In 1893, the Cattail Quarry was in operation, providing a variety of products and employment for African-American males. A portable sawmill was set up in Daisy about 1900 and ready to go to work on any lumbering or building project. In this 1942 photo, Daisy's kids were transported to Fred Kramer's pool for free Red Cross swimming lessons. The most prominent resident of Daisy was Governor Edwin Warfield. He served as governor of Maryland from 1904 to 1908. He lived at Oakdale, his estate on the southwest corner of the town. Here is the elegant interior of Oakdale, complete with pillars, fireplaces, arches, and other fine appointments. In 1899, 5 years before he was elected governor, Edwin Warfield hosted a reunion at Oakdale of Old Company A, 1st Cavalry of the Confederate States of America. Traveling west along Jennings Chapel Road, it's worth your while to take a slight detour and go through Daisy, part of Howard County's 150 years of history.
Where could a traveler lay his or her head in the 19th and 20th centuries in the area now known as Howard County? 150 years of history takes you to some of the places where visitors lodged before present-day hotels and motels. Richard Holmes narrates.
No doubt the earliest hotel in what later became Howard County was Spurrier's Tavern in Waterloo. It served as a popular stagecoach and traveler's stopping point between Philadelphia and Georgetown in colonial times. In the 1800s, it became known as Waterloo Inn. Built in the 1840s, the Howard House Hotel faced a tree-lined dirt main street in Ellicott City. By the 1900s, the Howard House had been considerably enlarged, partially because the hotel dining room was so popular they wanted to make room for more patrons. The fancy ironwork on the second-floor porch was donated to the metal drive during World War II. The hotel was later converted into an apartment house with shops on the street level. In the 1870s, Fannie Webb owned this hotel with a second-story porch. Located in Lisbon on the National Road, it served passengers from the railroad who were seeking overnight lodging, as well as city people vacationing to escape the summer heat. The Poplar Springs Hotel was built around 1840. It was also situated on the old National Road, which had been the primary road since 1792. The hotel offered an extensive view down to Glenelg, and dances were held in its large dining room. Traveling west from Ellicott's Mills along the National Road, also known as the Frederick Turnpike, you would come to Mrs. Hopkins Hotel at Pine Orchard. Today it is a liquor store. Early hotels, part of Howard County's 150 years of history.
Centuries ago, travelers may have made temporary stops at certain business establishments on their way to their destination. 150 years of history takes a closer look at these locations. Richard Holmes narrates.
Red House Tavern on the old Frederick Road was one of the earliest in Howard County, having been listed on a map as a tavern in 1795. Today, the Red House Tavern can be viewed from Route 97, 1 mile north of Interstate 70. Other taverns along this road were Black's in Alpha and Wayman's west of Poplar Springs. Joshua Roberts built a tavern and inn on the Frederick Road in Cooksville and named it for himself. It became well known for a visit it received from Revolutionary War hero General Lafayette in 1824. Spurrier's Tavern, later known as Waterloo Inn, was a popular stagecoach and travelers' stopping point between Philadelphia and Georgetown in colonial days. In the middle 1800s, Mrs. Disney's Hotel and Tavern was a profitable business on Main Street in Ellicott City. Later it was known as Mrs. Disney's Union Hotel and still later as the Grove City Hotel. In 1831, James Sykes, considered Sykesville's founding father, built a 4-story masonry hotel tavern with big porches around it. He built it as a rest stop for railroad travelers. Early taverns, part of Howard County's 150 years of history.
Ellicott City is home to the oldest railroad station in the U.S. In Pages from the Past, Richard Holmes leads the way to this historic landmark.
Back in November 1966, Howard Countyans stepped back in time to 1831. That's the year the B&O Railroad Station on Main Street opened. Reenactors in period dress and the station's fife and drum corps helped to celebrate the station's 165th birthday. A replica of America's first steam locomotive, the Tom Thumb, pulled into the station carrying a very important document, the deed to the station. During the ceremony, CSX sold the station to the county for a very fair price, $1. The B&O Railroad Station in Ellicott City is the oldest railroad station in America. It's listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Another step back in time from the pages of Howard County's past.
The oldest railroad station in the U.S. is located right here in Ellicott City. In Pages from the Past, Richard Holmes recounts the railroad station's restoration.
Back on May 20th, 1999, a host of county officials, representatives from the state, volunteers, and well-wishers alike gathered to celebrate the grand opening of the Ellicott City B&O Railroad Station Museum. This restoration restored the building to the way it was when it was first built. The most significant part was restoring the engine house doors. That makes it the only building of its kind in the world still existing. There were many built like it. It was actually a prototype for thousands that were built afterwards. They've all been torn down except this one. The station helps tell the story of the community and the lives of the people who not only lived here and used the station, but also who helped build the railroad. It literally changed the face of the nation, socially, economically, culturally, and spiritually. The first passenger train rolled into the Ellicott City B&O Railroad Station in 1831. It is the only train station of its kind remaining in America, and it is the oldest. A step back in time from the pages of Howard County's past.
Over time, the Howard County Fire Department has undergone many transitions. In Pages from the Past, Richard Holmes takes us through a time of development for the department.
The Howard County Volunteer Firemen's Association purchased American LaFrance fire trucks in 1928 and 1929, and the firemen gathered here to proudly show them off. In 1939, this building on Main Street in Ellicott City became the new location for the fire department. 1941 saw the addition of this American LaFrance pumper to the roster. Here we see our Ellicott City volunteer firemen ready to go to work circa 1952. This was the dedication of the Howard County Central Alarm Headquarters on April 18, 1959, the first of its kind in Maryland at a cost of $36,000. In 1958, the Ellicott City Volunteer Firemen's Association's Board of Directors agreed to provide ambulance service to the residents of Ellicott City and the surrounding area using this 1953 DeSoto sedan. April 16, 1970, saw the arrival of Howard County's first rear-mount 100-foot aerial ladder truck. Howard County's fire department in the middle years. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
The fire department took some innovative steps in its later years. Here's Richard Holmes with the continuing history of the Howard County Fire Department.
The Ellicott City Volunteer Firemen's Association started in 1888 as a bucket brigade, the first within Howard County, and it remained a volunteer organization for 71 years. Finally, in 1959, William F. Klein became the first career firefighter in Howard County's fire service. During the late 1960s and early 1970s, the ranks of paid firefighters were steadily growing. And in 1968, the first African-American firefighter was hired. And in 1974, the first female firefighter joined the fire department. The firefighting equipment was constantly being upgraded through the years. For instance, the first ambulance was this 1953 DeSoto sedan, which was followed by an International Model 100 Travelall multi-purpose Springfield conversion station wagon. Then, a very long Cadillac ambulance with fins. And eventually, different models of a cab in front and an enclosed ambulance body behind, each becoming more sophisticated. All these were just a part of the evolution of Howard County's fire department. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Blacksmiths were vital tradesmen in early Howard County. Every town had one. Inside Howard County's Richard Holmes provides a closer look in pages from the past.
In the early years of Howard County, like all rural areas at that time, blacksmith shops like this one in Highland were a focal point for the agricultural community. Farmers relied on their horses for farming, transportation, and recreation. The blacksmith made shoes for the horses and steel rims for the wagon. Records show that Howard County had 22 blacksmith shops in the 1800s. The average blacksmith, or smithy as they were called, could shoe almost 20 horses a day. Horseshoes had to be heated, fitted, and nailed on the horses' hooves after they were trimmed. In a typical blacksmith shop, the smithy worked at his anvil, the most used of his equipment. The shop was filled ceiling to floor with horseshoes, waiting to be sized and fitted, along with hundreds of tongs, each used for a specific job. This blacksmith shop at Oakland Mills still stands today with many of its original fixtures. Howard County's early blacksmiths, a necessary part of its rural life. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County's Past.
Some county firefighters have been getting help over the years to help them do their job. Pages from the Past tells us about a group of women who've done their part to help prevent fires in this county. Richard Holmes is the narrator.
These women, shown in a 1959 photo, were charter members of the Ladies Auxiliary to the Howard County Volunteer Firemen's Association when it first organized October 2nd, 1934. Over the years, the ladies have given support to the firemen in the way of contributions and donations. The ladies held bake sales, bazaars, bingo, card parties, dances, dinners, raffles, rummage sales, and suppers. In the early years, the ladies held a Christmas party for the active firemen and their wives. At these parties, the auxiliary presented the department with useful gifts or donated funds toward the purchase of equipment, like this 1964 International Travelall. Canteen service was always provided by the Ladies Auxiliary whenever the firemen requested it. The ladies have served everything from sandwiches to full meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, at accidents, fires, floods, training exercises, controlled burnings, special classes, and meetings. They had a food stand on Main Street when there was an opportunity during art shows and flower festivals. They also assisted with fire prevention displays and provided drinks at fire department activities at Chatham Mall. You could always count on the Ladies Auxiliary to provide a nice spread at the groundbreaking and dedication of a new firehouse. The Ladies Auxiliary to the Howard County Fire Department through the years. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
A trip to the mall wasn't an option for some county families years ago. Pages from the Past takes us to a time and place when buying a new pair of shoes meant a trip to a one-stop shop, which was probably the only shop in town. Richard Holmes narrates.
Howard County farm families scarcely needed to go to the store in bygone days. For most families, food needs were provided by the farm itself. However, the country store was a source of news for the goings-on in the community and also vital for items such as sugar, spices, tea, coffee, shoes, and boots. The country store was a grocery, hardware, harness, and dry goods store all under one roof. The store was jammed with all kinds of stuff, most anything a farmer needed. Harness, horse collars, sleigh bells, and straps of leather used to repair harness for horses and mules. The store also carried kerosene lamps, lanterns, and lamp globes. Another side of the store was filled with yard goods, ginghams, cotton prints, spools of cotton, and pretty white dishes for the farmers' wives. On the floor in each corner you could find buckets, cans, brooms, shovels, saws, and axes. A checkerboard and dominoes sat nearby on a small barrel. There usually was a barrel of sugar and 2 barrels of molasses standing on the floor. On the large counter, there would be a glass case that kept sticky fingers from picking up chocolate drops and other penny candies. When telephones first came out, the country store was usually the only place you could find one. The old country store. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Local farmers were able to save time when certain agricultural machinery came on the scene. One such item is described in today's Pages from the Past. Richard Holmes narrates.
Every summer, usually during the hot days of July, Howard County farmers would pitch in to help each other during threshing time. Threshing means to separate grain from its husk. The big threshing machine would be moved from farm to farm. It would arrive at each farm either the night before or at dawn of the threshing day. Sheaves of wheat were loaded onto the hay wagon to be hauled to the threshing machine. This is a mid-20th century threshing machine with rubber tires, which the wagon also had. In the early years, farmers used 3-fingered cradle scythes to cut the ripened wheat. It was then gathered and tied into sheaves and loaded onto a hay wagon and hauled to the barn. In later years, the wheat was cut and bound by a binder machine pulled by mules or horses. Before the threshing machine, wheat was flailed or beaten by hand to separate the wheat seed from the straw. That would take all winter, compared to getting the crop harvested in one day using a threshing machine. Threshing days of old, an integral part of the farmer's experience. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Well, it wasn't all work on local farms 1 century ago. Pages from the Past shows us what some farm kids did when they got some time off. Richard Holmes narrates.
100 years ago on any Howard County farm, the children in the family each had assigned daily chores, and work was the order of the day for the entire family. But as the old saying goes, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. So there were times when the kids found a chance for some merrymaking, like these two on an improvised seesaw. One of the favorite things to do was going to the old swimming hole and splashing around. These young swimmers are all smiles. Minding the cattle along a stream was one of the most pleasant jobs for the kids in the heat of summer. There might be time for a pretend wagon train moving across the whole backyard, being pulled in this case by 2 big strong turkeys in harness. Rolling hoops on the lawn was also a favorite with the kids. Sometimes Papa or Mama would get hitched to a cultivator or plow to provide the horsepower and some laughs. Having the dog ride on horseback was always good for a laugh. Playtime on the farm 100 years ago. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Rural county residents literally used horsepower to get around 100 years ago. Pages from the Past examines the transportation methods of that period. Richard Holmes narrates.
Prior to the automobile, the main mode of local transportation was by horse and buggy or the spring wagon. The covered buggy was for all seasons and all roads, and with a strong horse, it was possible to hobble through hubcap-high mud during the spring thaws. Farmers got to town in their buggies or wagons for the bare necessities and tied the horses up to the hitching rail. Here, buggies and wagons line up outside a carriage manufacturer before 1900. The shop was the hub of activity in town, for all farms needed good buggies and wagons. The old buggy, which had cover for both rain and snow, was sometimes considered a sign of prosperity. Not all families could afford to pay the $25 to $50 for a buggy and also pay for their work wagons, horses, and mules. A lot of buggies and wagons were bought at old country sales. In the snowy wintertime, the buggy was replaced with a sleigh. The sleigh bells are ready to jingle. The horse and buggy, Howard Countyans' mode of local transport 100 years ago. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County's Past.
Wagons played a part in the history of rural America. Pages from the Past shows how these wheeled vehicles were used 100 years ago. Richard Holmes narrates.
During the 1800s, farm families had only the wagon to travel from farm to farm or community to community. Wagons could be purchased from a carriage manufacturer or even from the Sears and Roebuck catalog, such as this model pictured in their 1897 catalog. Used wagons could also be purchased at country estate sales. Wagons usually cost around $80. Wagons came with removable sides so you could haul extra long logs and other hard-to-load items. Here we see a group of rural folks on their way to a wedding party. The bottom of the wagon has been covered with hay to cushion their ride. The huckster made his weekly visit to the farmer in his specially built wagon. The first mail wagons were used in 1899 to start the rural free delivery service. Prior to that, you had to pick up your mail at the nearest country general store. When the pasture grasses were short, the farmer would pitch chopped corn fodder from his wagon to his herd of cattle. One of the big jobs on the farm was pitching hay up onto the wagon. The all-purpose farm wagon of 100 years ago, a step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
The hen house played an important part on the farm at the turn of the century. Pages from the Past takes us to the barnyard to explain why. Richard Holmes narrates.
Chickens were indispensable on a farm 100 years ago. They served not only as a source of eggs, but also as the meat for Sunday dinner. The farm children often were the egg gatherers when they got old enough. Left to their own devices, hens liked to steal away to a hidden nest to sit on their eggs. 21 days later, the baby chicks would hatch. The hen would then proudly lead her chicks through the barnyard, which naturally would attract the farm family kids. Some farm families got newfangled kerosene-heated incubators through Sears and Roebuck catalogs to hatch large numbers of baby chicks. The traveling huckster always had a chicken crate to hold any birds the farmer might want to buy or sell. Many towns put up posters like this one to promote a local combined poultry show and carnival. This poster states, "The greatest trades, farmers, and poultry display ever held in Carroll or Howard counties." 4-H poultry clubs often held poultry shows sponsored by the University of Maryland Extension Service. They would display ideal pens of different kinds of all-purpose chickens best suited for the farm. The indispensable chicken, a staple of farm living. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County's Past.
Columbia was not the county's first planned community. Pages from the Past tells us about one such neighborhood whose beginnings reach back to the 19th century. Richard Holmes narrates.
The first planned community in Howard County was not Columbia, but Harwood in Elkridge. Established in 1893, Harwood is located east of U.S. Route 1 off of Loudon Avenue. Harwood was envisioned as a purely residential community with very small lots. This subdivision was made with transportation by rail in mind, and land was set aside for a railroad station at the end of Euclid Street, where the tot lot is currently located. There were restrictions against businesses locating in the area, so grocery and general shopping was accomplished elsewhere. The county operated a one-room school about halfway between Hanover and Harwood. The school, still standing, is now a residence as seen here. The lots were so small that the Harwood Park Church, Harwood's only church, had to buy 4 lots to build on. The people in the community found that the only church denomination that would loan them money to build a church was the United Methodist. Harwood was slow to develop, and some original purchasers never built on their lots. In time, the county required at least 3 lots to be purchased in order to build a house. The community first got electricity after World War II in the 1940s and didn't get sewage until the 1960s. Harwood predated Columbia by 74 years as the county's first planned community. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
The local medical facility was built almost 30 years ago in connection with the growth of a new county town. Pages from the Past takes us through the history of the county hospital. Richard Holmes presents the story.
Howard County General Hospital, located in town center in Columbia, was founded in 1973 by James Rouse to serve the needs of the residents of his new town of Columbia. In 1977, work began on the 2-story medical office building that would expand radiology, including a mammography unit. That was followed by a new medical surgical wing in 1979. August 1980 saw a new north wing expansion to the original building, which added 120 beds to the original 59, labor and delivery rooms, and pharmacy and dietary services. In 1988, a new south wing was built, adding another 30 beds and doubling the size of the hospital. In 1994, the hospital initiated one of the most advanced regional oncology centers on the East Coast, bringing together sophisticated radiation and medical oncology services for the first time locally at one facility. In September 1996, the hospital opened the Central Maryland Heart Center, the county's first cardiac catheterization laboratory. In 1998, Howard County General Hospital partnered with Johns Hopkins Medicine to help ensure its continued growth and success. In October 2000, there was a groundbreaking for an expansion and renovation project to include a new 16-bed intensive care unit and a new wing to include a new and expanded emergency department, pediatric services, labor and delivery unit, and a neonatal intensive care unit. Howard County General Hospital, from its modest beginnings to a state-of-the-art facility. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
The 1960s saw considerable growth for Howard County. It came about because of the development of a new town. Pages from the Past gives the history of this area. Richard Holmes narrates.
In October of 1963, James W. Rouse, known mostly for building a few shopping malls, announced to the citizens of Howard County that his company had acquired more than 21 square miles, 1/10 of the county's total land, for the purpose of building a new city that eventually would be named Columbia. His vision was to create a planned city that would avoid the sprawl, waste, and inconvenience that have come to typify small-scale development. The city would provide jobs, recreation, shopping, health care, commercial and industrial development, along with a broad range of housing choices. In 1963, Jim Rouse created HRD, the Howard Research and Development Corporation. This joint venture of the Rouse Company, then called Community Research and Development Incorporated, and the Connecticut General Life Insurance Company, was responsible for planning and developing Columbia.
It ought to be possible to build a city that respected the land, that organize the functions of a city in a way that was convenient, that served the people of the city.
Before any plans were drawn, a work group was formed to help determine what the city's social objectives should be and how they might be reflected in the physical plan. The objectives reflected Rouse's vision of creating a garden city where residents could enjoy the aesthetics of the rural countryside but have the employment and social advantages of a city. The group is made up of professionals such as educators, sociologists, economists, as well as city planners. The first steps in James Rouse's vision of Columbia, a step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
The history of Howard County's Columbia includes a plan to purchase acres and acres of land to help further a vision. Pages from the Past reviews that part of the story of what became the new town. Richard Holmes narrates.
In 1963, someone was secretly buying up land around Howard County to create the new town of Columbia.
If it hadn't been, the second property would have been twice the price of the first property. It would not have been economically feasible. It had to be done quickly, had to be done quietly. If it had to be done today, I don't think there's a prayer of getting it done.
Hot topic of discussion during the summer of '63, and all kinds of assumptions that even the Russians were buying the land. But our thought was probably it was being put together for someone like Levitt, who was the big home builder in that time in New Jersey and New York State. He had built planned communities in those areas, and so this made a lot more sense to us as to who was acquiring the land.
Robert Moxley had listed several farms for sale, all in all over 10,000 acres. Even he didn't know who was buying all the land.
The bulk of the property was acquired or under contract within a relatively short period of time. I would say most of it 90 days, a relatively short period of time. But there were out parcels that took quite a while. For example, the Bassler property, which is where I believe the Harwood County Hospital is. That was extremely difficult because Mr. and Mrs. Bassler had, I think, 9 children, and they were all married, some living out of state. And I would meet with them many, many, many times. And I would get close, but Mr. and Mrs. Bassler would not sign until everyone, including the spouse, agreed.
The land purchases to create Columbia were made possible with money from the Connecticut General Life Insurance Company. Fraser Wild, their chairman of the board, shared Rouse's vision and was able to put up the money and willing to wait for his share of the profits. Another of the first steps in James Rouse's vision of Columbia, a step back in time. From the pages of Howard County's Past.
The renovation of the Ellicott City Colored School will soon be completed in the weeks ahead. Now, that school was initially built with county funds in the 1880s to provide a primary education for African American students in Howard County during segregation. Pages from the Past goes back to the beginnings of that institution. Richard Holmes narrates.
The Ellicott City Colored School is situated on a hillside just across Tiber Creek from where Rogers Avenue dead ends into Frederick Road. Originally a one-room school, it was later divided into 2 classrooms, one for grades 1 to 3 and the other for grades 4 to 7. The school was heated by a potbelly stove. The remains of one such stove found under the school is shown here. 2 outhouses were on the stream bank. There was no electricity for many years, and then just a single ceiling bulb hanging down. A dairy truck came by once a day, and students could pay 3 cents for a half pint of milk. The teacher sold candy bars for 5 cents each. The candy money, along with parents collecting funds, was used to purchase the electric wiring, which the parents installed themselves. Books and other supplies were second-handed from the white schools. There were few maps and pictures. The students used slate board on which to write with chalk. The desks had inkwells. The walls inside the school were whitewashed. The boys oiled the floors to keep the dust down. They also had to stay after school to chop wood and gather kindling for them to fire up the potbelly stove the next morning before school. Coal was used for fuel later on. The girls kept the school cleaned. Water had to be hauled by pail from the creek just below the school. An outside pump was added in later years. After the school closed in 1953, it stood vacant for many years, rotting away. It was used briefly as a Pentecostal church in 1973. Eventually, the property was owned by a bus company, and the old school was used as a storage building. In 1972, Hurricane Agnes washed away the playground and the outhouses. The Elllicott City Colored School, an important part of the African-American experience in Howard County. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County's past.
The county's story takes some of its history from the Patapsco River Valley. Today's Pages from the Past travels along the valley and shows how life developed for Howard Countyans there. Richard Holmes narrates.
In 1743, William Cromwell surveyed a tract of land in the Patapsco River Valley for Caleb and Edward Dorsey. In 1761, John Cornethwaite established Dismal Mill, where Ilchester is located today. In 1762, the citizens of Elkridge Landing petitioned the Maryland Assembly for a town charter. It was denied. Elkridge Landing was a successful seaport, second only to Annapolis. In 1771, the Elllicott brothers, Andrew, Joseph, and John from Pennsylvania, purchased land in the Patapsco Valley and settled there. In 1782, the earliest known drawing of Ellicott's lower mills is made by George Elllicott. In 1806, the Ellicotts founded the Iron Rolling and Silting Mill. In 1807, the Baltimore and Fredericktown Turnpike Road, promoted by the Ellicotts, connected to the National Road. It was operated as a toll road. Just a few of the important early dates in the history of the Patapsco River Valley. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Life along the Patapsco River Valley in the 19th and 20th centuries flowed with business and disaster. Pages from the Past continued its look at the years relating to the valley. Richard Holmes narrates.
As part of the abundance of mills that dotted the length of the Patapsco River Valley, 1807 saw John Hegarty listed as the owner of one of the largest paper mills in the United States. In 1808, William Patterson and others established the Union Manufacturing Company for producing textiles on the Patapsco River, illustrated here in this old painting. This was their mill-raced path. By 1825, the company operated 76 power looms and 4,000 spindles. The company operated until 1887. In 1815, the Patapsco Cotton Factory was incorporated by the Maryland General Assembly. 13 years later, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad built a trestle bridge across the river to the mill. In 1824, the Thistle Mill opened at Ilchester. It produced textiles and was referred to as a manufactory. The Panic of 1837, tied to Andrew Jackson's attacks on the banks of the United States, seriously affected the Elllicott family's investments. In 1845, fire destroyed the Avalon Nail and Iron Works located near Elkridge and Relay. In 1856, the Orange Grove Flour Mill opened downriver from Ilchester. The mill was completely destroyed by fire in 1905. In 1868, the Great Flood of the Patapsco River devastated towns and industries along its banks, as it would do again in later years. Just a few more of the important early dates in the history of the Patapsco River Valley. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County's past.
Her name was Agnes. She visited Howard County years ago and left destruction in her path. Pages from the Past tells us more about this visitor who was no lady. Richard Holmes narrates.
In June of 1972, Howard County had already been saturated by spring rains when Tropical Storm Agnes arrived on Wednesday the 21st. The rains were not abnormal, but as evening approached, the rain steadily increased. The ground could absorb no more, and the runoff slowly overflowed the Patuxent, Middle Patuxent, Little Patuxent, and Patapsco rivers. By 11 p.m., the Patapsco was over its banks in Ellicott City. Within an hour, the water had risen 10 feet and swept away anything in its path. This flood became the biggest natural disaster in Howard County history. Daybreak on Thursday produced an awesome spectacle. At the foot of Main Street in Ellicott City, water reached the second floors. For a while, Howard County was almost isolated and Laurel was underwater. In Elkridge, the Harbor Tunnel approach road appeared to be a boat ramp. Over 900 people were forced to leave their homes. Boats were used to rescue families. Such people were taken to or directed to the Ellicott City Armory, which was made into a disaster relief center. A total of 704 county residents were left homeless for a period of time. Initially, 9,000 Howard County homes lost their electric power, and almost all phone services were disrupted. Many were without either service for up to a week. 7 people lost their lives. After a visit by Vice President Agnew, President Nixon declared Maryland a disaster area. Tropical Storm Agnes had dealt Howard County a staggering blow. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Well, today's Pages from the Past continues to look at how a tropical storm brought devastation to Howard County during the last century. Richard Holmes is the narrator.
For Howard County, the Great Flood of 1972 was relentless, causing destruction, erosion, and death. The surging water left people homeless and uprooted businesses, changing forever the face of the county. During the high water mark of the flood, people expressed amazement at its sheer depth. Here at Lower Main Street in Ellicott City, the floodwaters reached the tops of the first floors. The view from Ellicott City's B&O station kept people staring for hours. Here we see the floodwater at great height at the Simpkins Industries in Ilchester. Debris piled up at bridges such as this B&O trestle leading to the Wilkins-Rogers plant. The raging Patapsco had covered any trace of the Ellicott City Bridge. Then, as the waters receded, the damage became visible there and in 100 other spots from Sykesville to Elkridge. The fury of the flood is evident in the remains of the Simpkins industry buildings. At a washed-out bridge site, 2 boys got an eyeful of what the power of a giant flood can do. Here we see debris piled up on the Patapsco with destroyed buildings on the far side of the river. The flood of 1972, spawned by Tropical Storm Agnes, became the biggest natural disaster in Howard County history. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
The calm after the storm. Today, Pages from the Past looks at the recovery efforts in the county after a tropical storm made its destructive visit here in the last century. This is the last installment of a series focusing on the problems caused by Agnes. Richard Holmes narrates.
On Wednesday, June 22, 1972, the extremely high floodwaters from Tropical Storm Agnes caused massive evacuations, closed roads, demolished bridges, property damage, and death. After the waters subsided, grotesque scenes of upheaval the length of Howard County's rivers and surrounding areas illustrated the awesome power of the flood. Here is one of the 2 bridges at Marriottsville that was swept 3/10 of a mile downstream along with giant trees. At the Adley Truck Terminal in Elkridge, big trucks were swept into the Patapsco River and blocked debris. Automobiles were carried away and piled on top of each other by the flood's great force. This is what was left of one of the historic Elllicott homes that had recently been restored. It had stood for 200 years but was now a total loss. The National Guard was called up to help with the cleanup and to replace washed-out bridges with temporary ones until new ones could be built. The fire department, in addition to providing a host of emergency services during the height of the flooding, also spearheaded the efforts to clean up the debris and mud from the flooded streets and pumped out flooded basements, especially those on Lower Main Street in Ellicott City, where floodwaters reached the 2nd story. The Corps of Engineers played a major role in the recovery phase of the disaster. The Corps set out to clean up the debris in the major rivers, restore bridges, and the damaged sewer lines. Using disaster relief funds, the Corps awarded contracts for necessary repairs. The Great Flood of 1972. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
From carriage house to house of worship. Narrator Richard Holmes explains how a former stable for horses ended up as part of the faith community in this edition of Pages from the Past.
Oliver's Carriage House in Columbia, located just off Route 175 on Vantage Point Road, dates back to the late 1820s. It was originally a carriage house and a stable for thoroughbred horses. It was owned by Robert Oliver and subsequently by his son Thomas, both avid horsemen favoring the Old English tradition of hunts. Robert Oliver had acquired land on which he built a mill and several other structures, including the carriage house. Part of that original land purchase included the manor house, now called Oakland Manor, located near the carriage house. Over the years, the Oliver estate was divided up and sold to farmers, speculators, and developers. The carriage house had many uses as the property changed hands, mainly from carriage house and stable to garage. This photo is from the late 1960s when the carriage house and property were purchased by the Rouse Company as part of the land deal that became Columbia. In 1972, it was purchased by Columbia's Kittabaqundi Community Christian Church that had been meeting in the manor house. After renovations, the carriage house opened for church services in 1975. In the conversion from carriage house to church building, the main floor stable stalls were retained as is for offices, including the sliding stall doors as office doors. The second floor hayloft, complete with organ, grand piano, and good-looking, comfortable individual padded seats, is used for church services or is easily converted to other activity use. A giant stone fireplace is on one wall. This big hall has an upper hayloft at each end. The auditorium is also home to the Kittabaqundi Community Theater. Oliver's Carriage House in Columbia, serving many generations of Howard County residents. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
We now travel to the western part of the county on this edition of Pages from the Past. GTV intern Brooke Sachs wrote and produced today's segment. You may remember Brooke as our pet spokesperson. She's finishing up her internship at GTV. As her final project, she researched one local town and found it was #1 when it came to various events in its history.
Lisbon, a quiet town in western Howard County, is the site of 3 historic county firsts: the first planned community, the first planned high school, and the first female school principal. In 1802, the same year as Jefferson's famed Louisiana Purchase, Caleb Pancoast made a land purchase of his own from Seth Warfield and James Barnes. He built this house, shown here in 1804. By 1822, Pancoast had enlarged his property and divided it into 100 quarter-of-an-acre plots, complete with roads and alleyways. All travel west at that time came through Lisbon, as it was situated on the National Road, and by 1835, 8 stagecoaches were stopping by each day. Lisbon also had the distinction of having the county's first high school. Built in 1899, it was only open for 2 years and graduated just 2 students, 1 each year. The Lisbon Elementary School was the first in Howard County to be run by a female principal. Mrs. Davis, seen here in 1990, was appointed in 1958 and was behind an array of groundbreaking school programs. Lisbon Elementary was the first school to be completely integrated, in which both students and faculty were of different races, as well as the first to have its own breakfast programs to supplement school lunches, and the first to appoint teachers who specialized in only reading or special education. Lisbon, a small city with big firsts. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
One of the locations that houses the county's documented history is also part of this area's past. Pages from the Past visits the Historical Society. Richard Holmes narrates.
The current home of the Howard County Historical Society Library on Courthouse Road in Ellicott City is said to have been standing during the War of 1812, when it served as a hospital for the wounded and dying. In 1820, the building became the Ellicott's second school. At this time, the town's Quaker fathers deemed it best to separate the boys from the girls. While the girls remained in the old building east of the Patapsco River, the boys were transferred to larger quarters in the little house beside the Presbyterian Church, a site then known as Sam's Rock. The boys stayed only until 1824, when they moved to another building atop College Avenue. The little stone house began life as a simple one-story stone structure, the outline of which remains visible today. At some point in time, a second story in stone was added above the original house. In the late 19th century, a two-story frame addition was built onto the back, facing Park Avenue. Still later, scrolled ironwork posts and railings were added on the south porch, and a second-story shingled sun porch constructed above, hiding a mansard roof. Known at different times as the Old School and the Weir Building, it was sold by Mary Getz Weir in 1951 to Howard County for use by the Howard County Historical Society. It now houses their library, a little house that grew to become a repository for Howard County's history. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County's past.
An audience before the judge could take you to one of the county's historic buildings. Pages from the Past offers a history lesson on the county courthouse.
Construction of Ellicott City's old courthouse on Court Avenue began in 1841. Before its construction, Court Avenue did not exist. Today, the road winds its way through an area once known as Mount Misery. The courthouse was finished and opened for the spring session in 1843 and was considered spacious by the Howard District Press at that time. It cost $28,000 to complete. The cannon on the lawn is said to have been captured at the Battle of Bladensburg during the War of 1812 by John Dorsey, who lived on St. John's Lane. The old courthouse is described as being Greek-inspired with some classical features. In 1938-39, a $40,000 rear addition funded by the federal government enlarged the original structure. During a 1980s multi-million-dollar renovation, the courthouse was enlarged and the interior completely rebuilt. The entrance was also moved from its original front door to a grand new portico opening to the rear parking lot. Incorporated into the 1986 courthouse renovation and addition was a two-story granite block house fronted with wrought iron porches on both the first and second floors. This structure was originally built in 1840 as a home for the Edwin Parsons Hayden family. At one time, the Board of Education and the District Court used the house as offices. Before the house's interior was gutted for renovation, court employees told tales of smelling breakfast cooking when arriving for work in the morning, although the house had no kitchen by then. Turning doorknobs and creaking doors left some with little doubt that Hayden family spirits kept watch over their home. Originally, the courtroom had the Victorian look, with iron railing and crossed flags. In the 1940s renovation, the courtrooms took on a colonial look. The 1986 renovation gave the courtrooms an oval look. Howard County's 1843 courthouse in Ellicott City down through the years. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
The county's deputy sheriffs work out of a building that once housed the county's jail. We turn back the pages of time as we learn the history of the county's earlier jailhouse. Richard Holmes narrates in this edition of Pages from the Past.
Standing in a grove of willow trees, Willow Grove, Howard County's 1878 jail in Ellicott City once presented a picturesque setting at the rear of the courthouse. Also known as the Emery Street Jail, the cupola on its roof marks its location. The barn on the left housed the sheriff's horse and cart. The granite jail has an attached frame building behind it which included the warden's residence. The original plans for the jail called for 16 cells, 8 by 10 feet, with iron-grated doors, and the interior would be whitewashed and heated by a large stove. The basement of the main jail building had cells for the more troublesome prisoners. Each 8 by 10 cell had 2 double bunks, a toilet, wash basin, and a bookcase. The cell door had a small opening to pass food trays through. Later, security cameras encased in heavy tubing were in the small hallway aimed at each cell. The more nonviolent prisoners were housed in a large cell area almost the size of the outer walls of the main jail building on its second floor. The other half of this area housed double-deck bunks. In the cell area with the tables, there is a stairway down to the eating area below, with a cell-type door at the foot of the stairs. At one time, the prisoners had a large outside fenced-in area with barbed wire and razor wire at the top as their recreational area, complete with a basketball backboard and hoop. This spot in the backyard at the top of the steps was the site of hangings. An elevated walkway from the top floor of the jail was a direct route in taking inmates to and from the courthouse next door. Today, the Sheriff's Department is housed in the old jail, and this walkway is their main entrance. Willow Grove served Howard County for over 100 years before the new detention center was built in Jessup. Another step back in time. From the pages of Howard County's past.
You can find out what colonial life was like in this area by visiting a corner of historic Ellicott City on the weekends. Pages from the Past takes us to a log cabin where you can get a lesson on local history. Richard Holmes narrates.
Ellicott City's Thomas Isaac Log Cabin was built just 8 years after Ellicott City was founded in 1772. Thomas Isaac was an absentee landlord who had the rent collected with the town's policeman. The cabin, formerly located on Merriman Street, is the oldest surviving structure in Ellicott City. Built as a settler's cabin, the building has since served as a home, the original meeting place of the St. Luke's AME Church, and a storage shed until donated by the Stanton family in 1988 for historic restoration. By then, the cabin had become a ruin. It was saved by historic Ellicott City and the county's Department of Parks and Recreation. They dismantled it log by log and stored it for future restoration at the corner of Main Street and Ellicott Mills Drive. Today, the fully restored log cabin sits at that location along with the restored little old original 1840 courthouse. It is 1.5 stories tall with 2 rooms on each floor. The interior of the log cabin has been furnished with household items that were in use during its early years as a home. Here we see an old-fashioned trundle bed supported by ropes leaning on the left wall and other items used every day in keeping house. This was the stairway leading up to the 2 rooms on the second floor. In its later years, a big black cook stove provided heat for the entire house. The Thomas Isaac Log Cabin, another step back in time. From the pages of Howard County's past.
Now, those who broke the law in this area close to the mid-19th century may have appeared before the judge from a location not too far from the present courthouse. Pages from the Past takes us to the early days of this jurisdiction. We'll see where judges held court back then. Richard Holmes explains in this narration.
In Ellicott City, at the foot of Ellicott Mills Drive, sits the little old stone building that was the Howard District's first courthouse. It was in use from 1840 to 1843, when what is now Howard County was still part of Anne Arundel County. In 1969, the old courthouse was a private residence in the Fells Lane slum area that was scheduled to be demolished. The 3 dwellings on the side of the building originally were stables. The building's historic importance was rediscovered in 1970 by the president of the Howard County Historical Society. After a long lobbying effort, it was restored. When restoration started, the workers found 14 layers of linoleum on the floors. The outside walls were 18 inches thick. During renovation, the inside of the building had to be almost completely rebuilt, including floors, partitions, windows and doors, as well as a new roof. Money for the restoration came from the Howard County government, the Howard County Historical Society, and from fundraisers. Many craftsmen volunteered their time and services to help with the reconstruction. The restored building first became the office for a tourist bus company. Now, Historic Ellicott City Incorporated operates the building as the Heritage Orientation Center, featuring displays relating to Howard County history. From courthouse to dwelling to museum. Quite a journey for a little stone building, the first courthouse in what eventually became Howard County. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Santa helped save a county town, at least temporarily, near the mid-20th century. Pages from the Past explains how one businessman planned to create a village with a theme for the holidays. Richard Holmes narrates.
When Howard County's Savage Mill ceased operation as a mill for the last time, just before Christmas in 1947, the mill townspeople were forced to find work elsewhere, and the village was facing economic hardship. But by August of 1948, a hero had arrived to save the day. Businessman Harry Himes' forte was Christmas ornaments, and he moved his Santa Novelty Company to the Savage area with the intention of creating a year-round decorated Christmas village called Santaheim. He bought the Savage Mill and its surrounding property, including all of the houses and the community hall.
He had a Christmas store in the community hall. He fenced off the rest of the park down there and had reindeer in it. And even the little old post office down there had candy canes decorating it. And all the mill houses up that end of town, he painted different pastel colors and fixed them up.
He arranged for special trains to move tourists in and out from Washington and Baltimore. During the first season, as many as 15,000 people a day visited and shopped. But Himes' vision of a Christmas village outweighed his pocketbook, and in 1950, he was forced to sell the mill buildings and property. Santaheim, Maryland in Savage. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Historic Ellicott City has been the location for more than its share of ghost stories, it seems. Today, Pages from the Past visits one local house that has dished up aromas from the past. Richard Holmes explains in this narration.
One Ellicott City building is said to be inhabited by an entire family of ghosts. The Hayden house, also known as Oakland, is situated in between the old and new courthouses. Edwin Parsons Hayden built the house in 1840 as a home for his family. He died in 1850 at the age of 38, leaving a widow and 6 children. It is his ghost and those of his wife and children that are reported to haunt the premises. The county purchased the house in 1937, and it was used by the Board of Education as its headquarters for some time. From the 1960s to 1981, the Hayden House was the home of the District Court and the Department of Parole and Probation. It was during this period that many strange happenings began to occur. Employees started reporting unexplained smells of food cooking, and the building no longer contained a kitchen. The odor of bacon, eggs, toast, biscuits, and coffee was common in the morning. Other times of the day, the employees would smell vegetable soup and apple cobbler. A number of the employees noticed these smells along with shadowy figures and vaporous shapes that would suddenly appear and disappear. Doors would open all by themselves, and doorknobs would rotate without the aid of human hands. Although the district workers were not afraid of the ghosts and considered them friendly, at the same time, no one was anxious to remain in the building by themselves after dark. Since renovations to the house, converting it into the county's law library, the Hayden family ghosts no longer have been seen or heard. Howard County's Cooking Ghosts, a step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
A certain ring changed the life of some Howard Countyans. Pages from the Past takes us back to the time when communicating by telephone was new. Richard Holmes narrates.
Although Howard County and Ellicott City kept step with other communities in introducing telephone service, the date of the establishment of the first telephone is not revealed in early records. Some pioneer residents believe that Alexander Graham Bell's invention made its debut at Ellicott City in the 1890s. Telephone company records show that in June 1902, Ellicott City boasted of 30 telephones. They were served from an exchange located on the south side of Main Street, about 500 feet east of the Columbia Pike in Low-Rand Store. Beginning in 1902, the number of telephones increased steadily, and by 1907 there were 176 in and around the city. The central telephone office in Ellicott City also serves subscribers in outlying areas, including Dayton, Clarksville, Highland, Glen Elg, and Guilford. In these pioneer days of telephone service, emphasis was placed on speed and accuracy in completing calls. In the earliest days in the rural areas, the only phone usually was in the country store and was mainly used to summon a doctor, veterinarian, or to report deaths to relatives. Once phones were installed in residences, a number of homes shared a party line, with each family having a distinctive ring of its own. Howard County and its earliest telephones. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Well, the funeral practices of Howard Countyans and others throughout the nation changed over time. We examine those changes in this edition of Pages from the Past. Richard Holmes is the narrator.
Prior to 1800, funerals were conducted by family members with the help of neighbors. Almost no professional undertakers existed. Relatives or friends washed, laid out, and dressed the body. The wake or watch for family and visitors was held in the parlor of the deceased's home, if there was one, or simply the best room of the house. Afterwards, the coffin would be carried on foot to the meeting house or church, if it was not too far away, for a religious service, and then to the burying ground or taken directly to the family graveyard. The Pennsylvania Dutch, who settled in Howard County, served post-funeral feasts to replenish the energies of family and neighbors who had driven a long distance. By the early 1800s, funerals were becoming more commercial. Carpenters were providing coffins, either built to order or ready-made, and carriage makers were designing special funeral coaches decorated with black draperies and drawn by a team of shiny black horses, sometimes with black plumes on their heads. During the second half of the 1800s, funerals grew increasingly formal and elaborate. Black-bordered funeral invitations were sent out, and the front door of the deceased was hung with a black wreath and/or a black mourning ribbon. It became the custom to distribute memorial tokens to the funeral guests. Funeral practices in early Howard County. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Well, over the years, mills offered employment opportunities for county residents, but those outside mill communities might not have been aware of the inner workings of the local mills. Pages from the Past shed some light on this topic in this edition. Richard Holmes narrates.
In early rural Howard County, an exciting time for a young boy was his first wagon ride with his papa or grandpa to the local grist mill. His greatest treat was to see the miller lift the sluice gate and watch the water rush from the head race onto the large water wheel, which turned from the weight of the water. There were creaking noises as the machinery inside the mill turned to grind the corn, wheat, or buckwheat. 1 bushel of wheat would make 40 pounds of flour. Corn was ground into corn meal to make corn cakes for breakfast. Corn was also ground for cattle, horse, and hog feed. Upon arriving at the mill, a rope would be lowered down from the top floor. Each bag of corn was hooked to the rope and lifted up to the second floor and dumped into a hopper. Wooden gears turned the mill machinery, and the corn kernels were ground between the 2 burr stones. 1 stone turned and 1 stayed still. Here, the millwright sharpens the burr stone to allow for better milling of the corn or wheat. Another opposing wheel sits on top of the burr to create the grinding action on the flat surface of the stone. The miller did not take money from the farmers, but kept part of the corn, 1/9 of the total weight, as payment for the grinding work. This was the miller's toll. A lot for a young farm boy to learn on his first visit to the local grist mill in early Howard County. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.